Modern environmental stimuli, from the frequency of sirens to the persistence of notifications, operate as a correction mechanism. These are not random urban noises. They are calibrated inputs designed to maintain a specific, manageable frequency within the population. Within this framework, the human subject functions as a variable. Your behavior and attention are monitored by a system that requires a predictable, constant baseline of activity to remain stable. This control architecture is the psychic mold. It is an invisible, systemic structure that tethers human consciousness to the lower chakras, ensuring that most of your internal energy is consumed by the immediate requirements of survival. Because the system is reactive, shifting away from a conditioned behavioral loop creates a frequency mismatch. The environment responds by deploying chaos, abrasive noises, and high-urgency alerts intended to shock the individual back into a state of reactive compliance. Increased external friction and environmental chaos are measurable indicators that your internal frequency is attempting to move beyond the simulation's established baseline. To dismantle this, we must examine orgomechanics, the technical domain where biological reality is subjected to systemic manipulation. We can analyze the simulation using engineering logic. By mapping the system's inputs and identifying its intended outputs, we can identify specific biological and psychological points where the code can be overwritten. Our analysis follows 4 distinct modules: psychological conditioning, symbology, biological vulnerability, and the metaphysical override. These are not modern digital innovations. These control modules are ancient architectures, embedded into the historical foundations of civilization to manage the linear flow of human energy. Overriding the psychic mold allows for a systematic uncoupling from a managed timeline, moving from a state of survival to one of connected thrival. Module 1 centers on classical conditioning, which serves as the simulation's fundamental autopilot script. The system utilizes unconditioned stimuli, your natural biological drives for safety and connection, as the primary energy source for the loop. It then introduces neutral stimuli, meaningless inputs like digital alert tones or high-frequency colors like red and yellow. By pairing your survival instincts with these abrasive signals, the simulation bypasses the logical mind. This creates a direct shortcut that triggers an immediate internal reaction before you can consciously process the input. This comparison shows how digital fear loops map onto Pavlovian conditioning. The response is a low-vibrational, reactive state. Auditory warfare, like a sudden siren, acts as a glitch correction. It interrupts internal coherence, pulling you back into the screening function of fear. Because this reaction happens at a biological level, your logical mind is ineffective at preventing the initial adrenaline spike. These repeated adrenaline spikes reduce the individual from a conscious architect of their day into a reactive subject trapped in a managed loop. Module 2 moves from the psychological to the historical foundation of the psychic mold, time theft. These Sumerian temple ledgers represent the first engineered debt. By recording grain debts and charging interest, priests turned biological processes into a mechanical shackle, turning farmers into serfs. To prevent total societal collapse from compound interest, ancient rulers instituted the Jubilee, or Amargi, a periodic reset that wiped the debt ledgers clean. Power shifted when these resets were replaced by perpetual debt models. In the Roman era, the debtor's body itself became the collateral, and the concept of a clean slate was treated as a crime. The shift to state-minted coins allowed sovereigns to monopolize the medium of exchange. This created a central chokehold. If you could not pay taxes in their specific coin, you were marked as a criminal against time and state. This ancient ledger has evolved into the global digital pulse of today, where debt is no longer a physical weight, but a mathematical constant. In this chronological architecture, a loan is a temporal trap, a contract forcing a biological entity to labor in the future to pay for the present. Sustaining this trap across a global population requires a constant subconscious anchor, a mechanism we identify as pocket propaganda. In 1935, Franklin D. Roosevelt moved the Great Seal onto the dollar bill, placing a mimetic anchor into the public's hands during the Great Depression. This Series 1935 certificate is the artifact that brought these psychological triggers into every pocket in America. The unfinished pyramid serves as a physical representation of the hierarchy of labor. The base provides the structural stability,
while the detached capstone signifies that the governing intelligence operates on a different frequency. The Latin phrase novus ordo seclorum declares a new order of the ages. It signals that the linear timeline is now under management, moving away from ancient, cyclical views of time.
The power structure flipped the Eye of Providence from its original meaning of internal spiritual light. It was rebranded into a symbol of external surveillance, creating a fear meme that forces the individual back into a survival state. This 1782 finalization by Charles Thomson used Enlightenment mathematics to anchor the sequence of power. It defines a hierarchy where the base labors to complete a pyramid that remains perpetually unfinished. Every transaction forces the subject to interact with these glyphs, subconsciously reinforcing their status as a debtor within a managed sequence. Module 3 analyzes the biological vulnerabilities that the psychic mold exploits to bypass our logical defenses. Our ability to filter out systemic manipulation depends on a baseline of physical and chemical stability within the body. Physical crash periods, such as exhaustion, irritability, or illness, significantly narrow the bridge to your conscious self, making you more susceptible to external influence. Fear-based narratives succeed during low-frequency biological states. The system's propaganda is mathematically guaranteed to strike when your screening filters are weakest. Once a narrative bypasses your logical mind during a vulnerable dip, this constant repetition creates a path of least resistance for future thoughts. Metaphysical deconditioning is only possible if your physical biology is stabilized against the environmental triggers that aim to hijack it. Protocol 1 is frequency shielding, which addresses the biological hardware required to block systemic inputs. The gut functions as a second brain and serves as the physical anchor for your body's overall frequency. Stabilizing the gut with mineral-dense biological compounds like CMOS provides a physical buffer. This stabilization makes it harder for the simulation's abrasive stimuli to trigger a reactive emotional response. By neutralizing the biological irritability the system relies on, you reclaim control over the primitive autoconscious. Biological stabilization provides the necessary infrastructure for the psychological and metaphysical protocols that follow. Once the hardware is stabilized, you can execute Protocol 2, the pattern interrupt. The objective is to move into the state of the primitive autoconscious, the unbothered observer who sees through the simulation's filters. The pattern interrupt occurs the moment a chaotic stimulus is deployed. Instead of producing the conditioned emotional response of fear or urgency, the subject consciously maintains their internal state. You can use an anchored internal symbol, the Kailani trigger, to bridge the gap and immediately override the simulation's input. This override stabilizes your internal frequency, moving it into a state of coherent oscillation. In this state, you reclaim the original meaning of the I. You transition from being the one watched by an external power to being the observer who resets their own psychic debt. This dual approach, biological shielding and the metaphysical interrupt, dissolves the boundaries of the psychic mold, allowing you to operate as the architect of your own reality.